The morning sun rose deceptively calm, casting golden light across the skyline as Michael Carter sat frozen at his desk. Michael Carter stared at his laptop, eyes locked on red numbers falling like an endless cliff. Michael Carter muttered, "This can't be happening." Michael Carter's jaw clenched tighter with each drop, every second tearing apart the empire Michael Carter had built. The stock ticker plunged, and Michael Carter's phone buzzed with names of investors demanding answers. Michael Carter rubbed his temple, sweat trailing down, chest tightening under the crushing weight of $1 million loss. Michael Carter whispered, "It's slipping away." The office, once a sanctuary of ambition, now stood like a tomb. In a single morning, Michael Carter saw the nightmare begin. Michael Carter's phone buzzed relentlessly, echoing through the silence. David Miller rushed into the office, his face pale with panic. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, it's everywhere. The crash hit harder than anyone expected." Michael Carter whispered, "I've lost everything." David Miller leaned forward, eyes sharp, "Not everything, but close. Investors are panicking. They want answers." Michael Carter gripped the desk, knuckles white, mind filled with images of employees relying on him. David Miller pressed harder. "Michael Carter, you cannot stay silent. Speak now or their trust dies with your silence." Michael Carter's throat tightened. Words weighed heavier than the $1 million gone. This wasn't just collapse. It was a fall watched by everyone who once believed in Michael Carter. Michael Carter pushed himself to his feet, legs heavy as stone, and walked toward the window. Michael Carter stared at the city beneath storm-filled skies. Michael Carter muttered, "$1 million gone in a day." David Miller followed, resting a hand on Michael Carter's shoulder. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, you can fight back, but you must act now." Michael Carter's reflection in the glass looked worn, like a man aged overnight. Michael Carter whispered, "I promised security and delivered ruin." Michael Carter pressed his forehead against the cold glass, the skyline distorted by gathering clouds. David Miller stayed silent, the truth heavy between them. The city hummed below, indifferent to Michael Carter's devastation. Michael Carter closed his eyes, breath fogging the window, confessing silently that he had lost more than money. Michael Carter stumbled back to his desk as an email alert chimed. Michael Carter opened it and froze. Victoria Hayes had written, "Michael Carter, we are withdrawing support immediately. This collapse is unacceptable." Michael Carter whispered, "Victoria Hayes is pulling everything." David Miller cursed, pacing behind Michael Carter. Michael Carter said, "Without Victoria Hayes, we are finished." The laptop glow cast despair in cold light, thunder cracking outside. Rain streaked down the window as Michael Carter gripped his chair, realizing Victoria Hayes had executed his empire with a single line. Thunder roared as Michael Carter sat motionless, thoughts tearing through him like blades. Michael Carter whispered, "Was it greed or was it trust?" David Miller sat across the desk, face shadowed, silent. Michael Carter said, "One mistake, one misstep, and $1 million is gone." David Miller leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Michael Carter, this isn't just about money, it's survival now." Michael Carter lowered his gaze, shoulders buckling under invisible weight. Lightning illuminated the office, echoing the storm inside Michael Carter. The first act of ruin had ended, and Michael Carter knew darker chapters waited beyond the storm. Michael Carter sat in the dim office, rain streaking across the glass, while David Miller paced in silence. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, you need to face this before it crushes you." Michael Carter replied, "Every number is a blade, and I can't stop the bleeding." The email from Victoria Hayes burned on the screen, a verdict written in cold letters. Michael Carter thought of every late night, every sacrifice, every promise made. David Miller placed both hands on the desk and said, "Michael Carter, people still believe in you. If you walk away now, everything ends tonight." Michael Carter clenched his fists and whispered, "What if I've already lost them all?" The storm outside roared louder, as if the world itself mocked Michael Carter's downfall. Michael Carter stepped into the boardroom, his steps heavy as David Miller followed behind. Around the table sat silent partners, their eyes sharp with judgment. Victoria Hayes was absent, her absence louder than her presence. Michael Carter said, "I know the collapse has shaken your faith, but I will not abandon what we built." A partner whispered, "Michael Carter, faith won't pay the debts." Michael Carter's chest tightened, but his voice rose, "I will fight to restore what was lost." David Miller's hand brushed Michael Carter's shoulder, a silent anchor. The tension in the room was suffocating, as if the walls themselves leaned in to crush Michael Carter under the weight of his own promises. Michael Carter left the boardroom with David Miller at his side. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with glass walls reflecting shadows. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, you can't save this alone." Michael Carter replied, "I promised them everything. I must stand even if the ground breaks." David Miller lowered his voice, "Victoria Hayes has cut the cord, and without her, the others will follow." Michael Carter stopped, staring at his reflection in the glass, older and more broken than he remembered. Michael Carter whispered, "I can't let them see me crumble." David Miller said, "Michael Carter, they already have." The echo of footsteps filled the empty hall, each step a reminder of the empire slipping away. Michael Carter sat across from Samuel Price, the mentor who once ruled the markets but had fallen from grace. Samuel Price, with gray hair and weary eyes, sipped dark coffee. Samuel Price said, "Michael Carter, I warned you. The market shows no mercy." Michael Carter said, "I believed in the system, and it devoured me." Samuel Price leaned closer, voice sharp. "The system was built to devour. I learned that too late, and now you learn it with blood." Michael Carter stared at the table, his voice low, "I can't let it end like this." Samuel Price whispered, "Then you must decide, bend your principles or burn with them." The silence afterward carried the weight of two broken men staring into the abyss. Michael Carter walked through his nearly empty office floor, rows of desks deserted after layoffs. David Miller trailed behind, silence pressing heavier than words. Michael Carter said, "Every desk is a ghost of promises I made." David Miller answered, "Michael Carter, these ghosts will haunt you until you decide whether to fight or surrender." Michael Carter paused by a desk, touching a framed photo of a smiling employee's family left behind. Michael Carter whispered, "They trusted me." David Miller said, "Then don't let their trust die." The lights flickered above, shadows stretching across the abandoned space. Michael Carter stood surrounded by emptiness, the empire of glass and steel, now just a graveyard of ambition. Michael Carter sat across from David Miller, in the office conference room, the storm outside echoing the turmoil inside. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, debts are doubling by the hour. If you don't act, everything collapses." Michael Carter replied, "Every call is another nail in the coffin. Creditors want answers I don't have." David Miller pressed his palms on the table and said, "Michael Carter, we need a plan before this spirals beyond repair." Michael Carter's eyes darkened as he muttered, "The walls are already closing in. Every second, the hole grows deeper." The rain beat harder against the windows, the sound drowning the silence that neither man dared to break. Michael Carter walked into the lobby of a law firm, marble floors reflecting his weary frame. Across the table, lawyer Angela Brooks waited with files stacked high. Angela Brooks said, "Michael Carter, bankruptcy filings are already prepared. It may be your only way out." Michael Carter sat heavily, his voice breaking. "Angela Brooks, if I sign, everything I've built dies tonight." Angela Brooks lowered her tone. "Michael Carter, debts this size can swallow a man whole. Survival means sacrifice." Michael Carter clenched the armrest, whispering, "What survives if nothing is left of me?" The cold silence in the lobby hung heavier than her words. Michael Carter returned to his office late at night, the city lights dim under thick clouds. David Miller sat waiting, laptop open with urgent reports. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, creditors have frozen accounts. We're out of time." Michael Carter rubbed his face and whispered, "David Miller, I trusted people who drained me dry. David Miller slammed the laptop shut. Michael Carter, you cannot drown in blame. You need fire, not despair. Michael Carter paced the room, eyes wild with exhaustion. Michael Carter said, every door is closing, every ally vanishing. Even Victoria Hayes turned executioner. The fluorescent lights flickered, the room trembling like a man on the brink of collapse. Michael Carter met Victoria Hayes in a penthouse lounge, her presence sharper than the skyline behind her. Victoria Hayes, said Michael Carter. You gambled recklessly. Why should I save you now? Michael Carter clenched his fists and said, Victoria Hayes, you believed in me once. Did that faith vanish with one bad day? Victoria Hayes smirked, her tone cutting. One bad day cost me millions, and trust is more expensive than money. Michael Carter's voice cracked. Victoria Hayes, you abandoned me when I needed you most. Victoria Hayes leaned back, eyes cold as steel. Michael Carter, I never abandoned profit. You simply became unprofitable. Michael Carter stormed out of the penthouse, rain drenching his suit as he stepped into the empty street. David Miller caught up, shouting, Michael Carter, what did Victoria Hayes say? Michael Carter's eyes burned as he answered, Victoria Hayes said, I'm unprofitable. Nothing more than numbers to discard. David Miller grabbed Michael Carter's shoulder and said, Michael Carter, she doesn't define you. You must fight back before the ashes consume everything. Michael Carter stared up at the storming sky, water running down his face like tears. Michael Carter whispered, I built my dream with fire, and now it burns me alive. Michael Carter entered a dim warehouse, shadows stretching across steel beams. Samuel Price waited with arms folded, eyes filled with secrets. Samuel Price said, Michael Carter, the game you played was rigged from the start. Michael Carter stepped closer and whispered, Samuel Price, you knew this and never told me. Samuel Price smirked and replied, Michael Carter, the truth is rarely profitable. The ones you trusted set you up long before the fall. Michael Carter's fists tightened, his voice sharp. Samuel Price, tell me who. Samuel Price turned away, his silence heavier than the storm outside. Michael Carter felt betrayal coil around him like a serpent. Michael Carter sat at a small diner booth across from Angela Brooks, stacks of documents spread between coffee cups. Angela Brooks said, Michael Carter, here are the contracts that prove manipulation. You were never meant to win. Michael Carter scanned the papers, voice breaking. Angela Brooks, every signature was a chain around my neck. Angela Brooks leaned closer. Michael Carter, your partner siphoned funds while Victoria Hayes pulled the strings. Michael Carter slammed his hand against the table. Angela Brooks, tell me who betrayed me. Angela Brooks met his eyes, whispering, Michael Carter, the betrayal came from inside your own circle. Michael Carter stormed into the office where David Miller sat waiting, reports scattered on the desk. Michael Carter shouted, David Miller, were you part of this betrayal? David Miller stood, shocked. Michael Carter, I stood by you while everyone else fled. Michael Carter slammed a file on the desk. David Miller, these contracts show money vanished under your watch. David Miller's voice cracked. Michael Carter, I fought to protect you, but the system swallowed us both. Michael Carter's voice dropped. David Miller, I don't know who to trust anymore. Silence filled the room, broken only by thunder rattling the glass. Michael Carter met Victoria Hayes in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the stormy skyline. Victoria Hayes, said Michael Carter, you were never meant to be more than a pawn. Michael Carter leaned forward, his voice trembling. Victoria Hayes, you built me up just to tear me down. Victoria Hayes smirked. Michael Carter, you were valuable while you served me, nothing more. Michael Carter's chest tightened as he whispered, Victoria Hayes, you destroyed me for profit. Victoria Hayes replied coldly, Michael Carter, profit is the only loyalty I keep. Lightning split the sky behind them, sealing her words with fire. Michael Carter staggered out of the building into the rain, the betrayal echoing in his head. David Miller caught up, shouting, Michael Carter, You can't let Victoria Hayes break you. Michael Carter turned, his eyes blazing. David Miller, the truth has burned everything I trusted. David Miller gripped Michael Carter's arm and said, Michael Carter, then fight with what you have left. Michael Carter raised his head to the storm, whispering, I will fight, but the war has already scarred me. The rain poured heavier, as if the sky wept for Michael Carter's shattered world. Michael Carter stood in the boardroom, rain hammering the glass, while David Miller whispered, Michael Carter, this is your last chance to fight. Michael Carter slammed his hand on the table and said, David Miller, everything I own is already gone. Victoria Hayes entered with cold precision and said, Michael Carter, surrender now, and you may keep scraps. Michael Carter's voice rose, Victoria Hayes, I will not crawl for scraps. David Miller leaned forward, Michael Carter, this is a gamble that could bury you. Michael Carter's eyes burned. David Miller, I have already been buried. Tonight I dig my way out. Michael Carter walked to the center of the room, facing Victoria Hayes and David Miller with blazing eyes. Michael Carter shouted, Victoria Hayes, you think money defines me, but I will gamble everything on my own terms. Victoria Hayes smirked and replied, Michael Carter, emotion does not change balance sheets. David Miller said, Michael Carter, if you lose this gamble, there will be nothing left. Michael Carter breathed heavily and said, David Miller, I have nothing left already. Victoria Hayes leaned back in her chair and whispered, Michael Carter, then prove it. The room fell silent, storm winds rattling the glass, as if the world waited for his next move. Michael Carter spread documents across the table, his voice cracking. Victoria Hayes, I uncovered every hidden clause, every siphoned dollar. You orchestrated this collapse. Victoria Hayes narrowed her eyes and replied, Michael Carter, you signed willingly. David Miller shouted, Victoria Hayes, you bled the company dry like a predator. Michael Carter slammed the papers down and said, Victoria Hayes, this gamble is not about numbers. It is about survival. Victoria Hayes whispered coldly, Michael Carter, survival has a cost you cannot afford. Michael Carter straightened his back, whispering, Victoria Hayes, I cannot afford not to fight. Michael Carter leaned over the table, drenched in sweat and stormlight, his voice thunderous. Michael Carter shouted, Victoria Hayes, if you want me ruined, you must face me here and now. Victoria Hayes replied calmly, Michael Carter, you are finished whether I face you or not. David Miller grabbed Michael Carter's arm and said, Michael Carter, do not destroy yourself to destroy her. Michael Carter ripped his arm free and said, David Miller, this is not destruction. This is my last stand. Victoria Hayes smirked, Michael Carter, you always did mistake stubbornness for strength. Michael Carter stood tall as thunder shook the glass, his voice steady for the first time in days. Michael Carter said, Victoria Hayes, I will risk everything, not for money but for the people you abandon. Victoria Hayes narrowed her eyes and replied, Michael Carter, people are pawns, nothing more. David Miller whispered, Michael Carter, she will never understand loyalty. Michael Carter raised his head and shouted, Victoria Hayes, loyalty is stronger than profit. Tonight, I bet everything on loyalty. The storm roared louder as Michael Carter's gamble was declared, a moment where triumph and destruction stood side by side. Michael Carter walked alone into his office, dawn breaking after the storm. The silence was suffocating, the empire he built reduced to fragments. David Miller entered quietly and said, Michael Carter, you survived the fire, but at what cost? Michael Carter turned, his eyes hollow. David Miller, survival feels like ash in my mouth. David Miller placed a hand on Michael Carter's shoulder and whispered, Michael Carter, ashes still mean something remains. Michael Carter gazed at the empty desks, whispering, David Miller, they trusted me, and I gave them ruin. The rising sun cut through clouds, painting the destruction in cruel gold. Michael Carter sat across from Samuel Price in the cafe corner, the old mentor watching him with sorrow. Samuel Price, said Michael Carter, I warned you, This game takes more than it gives. Michael Carter stirred cold coffee, muttering, "Samuel Price. I thought I could beat the system." Samuel Price sighed. "Michael Carter, the system always wins, but scars teach more than victories." Michael Carter looked up and said, "Samuel Price, I lost more than money. I lost myself." Samuel Price leaned closer, whispering, "Michael Carter, then rebuild yourself before chasing what broke you." The weight of those words pressed heavier than debt. Michael Carter returned home, the first time in days, his suit soaked with the remnants of rain. Angela Brooks stood waiting with files in her hand. Angela Brooks said, "Michael Carter, I finalized the bankruptcy documents. Signing them frees you from the chains." Michael Carter looked at the papers and whispered, "Angela Brooks, freedom feels like surrender." Angela Brooks softened her voice, "Michael Carter, sometimes surrender saves a life." Michael Carter clenched his jaw and said, "Angela Brooks, what life remains if everything is gone?" Angela Brooks stepped closer, replying, "Michael Carter, the chance to rebuild is life itself." Michael Carter stood in the nearly empty office lobby, surrounded by boxes of files left behind by laid-off employees. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, this is the last day here. What do we tell them?" Michael Carter held a framed photo of an employee's family and whispered, "David Miller, we tell them the truth, even if it crushes us." David Miller's eyes glistened as he said, "Michael Carter, honesty won't pay bills, but it will keep hope alive." Michael Carter nodded, setting the frame down gently. Michael Carter said, "David Miller, hope is all we have left." Michael Carter walked through the rain-slicked street at dusk, his suit clinging, his steps heavy but steady. David Miller followed silently, while Angela Brooks walked on the other side holding the documents. Michael Carter said, "David Miller, Angela Brooks, the empire is gone, but I am not." David Miller replied, "Michael Carter, loss is not the end. It is the start of survival." Angela Brooks added, "Michael Carter, survival gives you the right to rebuild." Michael Carter stopped under a flickering streetlight, whispering, "Tonight, I bury the empire. Tomorrow, I begin again." The storm had passed, but the scars remained. Michael Carter stood on the rooftop of his office building as dawn broke, the skyline glowing in fractured gold. David Miller approached slowly and said, "Michael Carter, the city does not know what you endured, but it feels the echo." Michael Carter turned, his eyes red from sleepless nights, and whispered, "David Miller, $1 million vanished, but it feels like my soul went with it." David Miller placed a firm hand on Michael Carter's shoulder, saying, "Michael Carter, money can be rebuilt, but the soul returns only when you rise again." Michael Carter stared at the horizon, his voice breaking, "David Miller, what if I have nothing left to rise with?" David Miller stepped beside him. "Michael Carter, you have scars, but scars mean survival." Michael Carter closed his eyes and whispered, "David Miller, scars feel heavier than the fall itself." The wind whipped around them, carrying the sound of a city that moved on without them, while the rooftop held the weight of two men confronting what was lost and what must still endure. Michael Carter walked through a community hall filled with former employees gathered in silence. Angela Brooks stood near the front holding papers. Michael Carter raised his voice and said, "Angela Brooks, David Miller, everyone here deserves the truth." Michael Carter's voice trembled. $1 million collapsed in a single day, and that collapse cost you more than it cost me. Angela Brooks said softly, "Michael Carter, they are angry, but they came because they still want answers." David Miller stood at Michael Carter's side and added, "Michael Carter, words will not erase their pain, but silence will deepen it." Michael Carter nodded, whispering, "Angela Brooks, David Miller, I cannot give them back what they lost, but I will give them honesty." Michael Carter faced the crowd and shouted, "You trusted me, and I failed you, but I will not hide. I will not vanish. I will rebuild until trust returns, even if it takes a lifetime." The hall filled with heavy silence, broken only by scattered claps of weary hands. Michael Carter sat in a dim office lit by a single lamp, staring at documents for a new venture. David Miller sat opposite, exhausted but hopeful. David Miller said, "Michael Carter, after everything, you still want to start again?" Michael Carter leaned forward, eyes sharp. "David Miller, rebuilding is the only way to make scars worth carrying." Angela Brooks entered with quiet steps, placing a folder on the table. Angela Brooks said, "Michael Carter, I secured a minor investor. It is not much, but it is a beginning." Michael Carter's voice cracked. "Angela Brooks, beginnings are all I need." David Miller smiled faintly, whispering, "Michael Carter, this time we build smarter, stronger, with scars as our foundation." Michael Carter placed his hand on the folder and said, "Angela Brooks, David Miller, the empire I lost defined me once. The empire I build now will redefine me." The lamp flickered as if marking the fragile birth of something new. Michael Carter stood outside the courthouse steps with David Miller and Angela Brooks at his side. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing in relentless bursts. Michael Carter raised his voice. "I will answer because silence has cost me enough." Michael Carter's voice carried weight as he said, "The empire I built collapsed, but I will not disappear with it." David Miller said firmly, "Michael Carter, this is the truth the world needs to hear." Angela Brooks whispered, "Michael Carter, words today will shape tomorrow." Michael Carter looked at the flashing cameras and declared, "I have lost everything once, and I will fight to prove I can rise again." Michael Carter walked alone down a rain-soaked street at night, neon lights flickering across puddles. Michael Carter whispered, $1 million lost in a day, but not the will to rise." Michael Carter paused under a street lamp, his reflection fractured in the water below. Michael Carter said aloud, "I will carry this scar as a reminder that loss does not define me, but what I do after it does." Michael Carter looked toward the horizon where dawn's light began breaking faintly. Michael Carter whispered one final time, "This is not the end. This is the beginning of something greater." The street fell silent, except for the echo of his footsteps.